Good day, everybody. Here we are, the Bible in a year 2021, day 101. And we're just looking at two chapters today, First Samuel chapter 13 and 14. But there's a lot to cover. So, just the first couple of verses here. Um, Saul was 30 years old. Just have that in mind. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he ruled over Israel 42 years. Saul selected 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 of those were with Saul at Michmash in the hills near Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. He sent the remaining men home. So this was their permanent standing army. Um, yeah, 30 years old. He's a prototype. He's got nobody's example to look to, good or bad. And that's got to be hard. Now, the one to keep your eye on is Jonathan. In verse 3, Jonathan attacked the Philistine fort at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. So Saul sounded the alarm throughout the land and said, Hebrews, listen up. Thing is, Jonathan did this. Keep that in mind. Jonathan did this without his father's permission, and Saul gets blamed for it. They're going to say, yeah, Saul attacked. So in verse 6, we read here, when the Israelites saw that they were in trouble and that their troops were threatened, they hid in caves and thickets among rocks and tunnels and in cisterns. That harkens back to the age of the judges when they were constantly hiding. Even though they have a king, they are not putting much stock in him right now. Now, whew, like father, like son. We're gonna see. We saw that already that Jonathan just went out and attacked the Philistines, stirred up a lot of trouble. Saul has to face that now, has to deal with it, has to deal with what his son created. But we see that Jonathan is getting this from his dad because we see that his dad just like has no patience. Right? And we see that here in verse 8, 9. He waited 7 days, the time appointed for Samuel, but Samuel didn't come to Gilgal, and his troops began to desert. So Saul ordered, Bring me the entirely burned offering and the well being sacrifices. Then he offered the entirely burned offering. You got to be off your rockers. That is a job for the priest. He is not allowed to do that. And here he is as king, deciding that as king, he gets to do whatever he wants and he doesn't need to worry about it. This is just superstitious religious sort of things that they need to do, not understanding all that's entailed with it. Yeah, and when he gets called out on it and told that you've blown it, he turns around and he explains the motivation, but it's bad reasoning. I thought the Philistines are about to march against me at Gilgal, and I haven't yet sought the Lord's favor. So I took control of myself and offered the entirely burned offering. I took control of myself. And I guess if you were king, that would be the temptation, wouldn't it? Take control of yourself. But that's not what's supposed to happen. There's an order to things, and whether you agree with it or not, there is an order, and even as king, you have to follow that order. You have to follow the instructions. So, in verses 13 to 14, um, we can we he listen. He's only 10 to 15 years into his reign. That's where he is. 10 to 15 years into his reign, and he loses it. But consider for 42 years he was king, and like 15 years. Let's give it the maximum here. 15 years. Then he uh, he knows that his kingdom is not going to continue. His reign, it's not going to be passed on to his child. That's sad. How stupid of you! How stupid of you to have broken the commands. We're not allowed to use that word in my house. How stupid of you to have broken the commands the Lord your God gave you, Samuel told Saul. The Lord would have established your rule over Israel forever, but now your rule won't last. The Lord will search for man following the Lord's own heart, and the Lord will commission him as leader over God's people because you didn't keep the Lord's command. So we're looking at 25. We're looking at about um, 32 years. No, 32. Yeah, it's a lot of years. Um, 30. Where are we here? I can't do math tonight. It's anyway. It's a lot of years. It's 27 years. 27 years. Yeah, 27 years to go before he's finished as king, and he's being told this here. That's that's hard, and we see what he's facing. I mean, come on, the odds are not for him, and this is where Yahweh is supposed to be getting the glory, but it's pretty bleak. It says, no metal worker in verse 19, no metal worker was to be found anywhere in Israelite territory because the Philistines had said the Hebrews must not make swords and spears. So they're facing this situation with the Philistines, and there's only two swords among the entire army. And that's pretty bleak. And you can see there, it's not much of an army, you know. It was much bigger, but Samuel was late in showing up. It's kind of like a situation that we've seen in the past where the Lord says, "Hey, you have too many people. Send them home. You know, I can do this with 300." So he gives Saul a little more. He's got 600 unarmed men. It's not much of an army. So in the day of the battle, no swords or spears were to be found in the possession of any of the troops with Saul and Jonathan, but Saul and his son Jonathan had them. Yeah, good thing, right? Keep in mind as we go into verse 14, or sorry, chapter 14, this is as much Jonathan's story as Saul's. One day, Jonathan, Saul's son, said to his young armor bearer, "Come on, let's go over to the Philistine fort on the opposite side." But he didn't tell his father. Does that sound like anything? Well, Samuel's not showed up, so I'm going to make the offering myself. Jonathan is just hankering for action, and his father's seems to be indecisive. But this isn't good. It's not right. Jonathan is under authority, and he should be answerable to his father. He should talk things over with his father. He's not in charge. He doesn't get to make these decisions. If you're not in charge, you don't get to make the decisions. You can bring the decisions to the decision maker. You can bring ideas and such, but it's still up to them whether they go forward with that or not. And all through this, Jonathan is wrong. Even though the Lord uses him, it's in spite the fact that Jonathan is out of step here. But look at this. You gotta admire this. What an amazing statement of faith, though. In verse 6, Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, "Come on, let's go over to the fort of these uncircumcised men. Maybe the Lord will act on our behalf. After all, nothing can stop the Lord from saving, whether there are many soldiers or few. Salvation is always in the hands of the Lord, not ours." Um, and he seems to understand this. Jonathan seems to get this, that Yahweh glorifies himself in our weaknesses. And our weakness, Yahweh is able to show himself. And that's why quite often we may find ourselves in a weakened position going into things. He doesn't want us robbing him of his glory. But if they say, "Come on up," then we'll go up because that will be the sign that the Lord has handed them over to us. Yeah, it's a precarious situation. They have to climb up a hill or a cliff on their hands and feet, so they can't carry their swords with them. They can be picked off with bows and arrows at any time. And yeah, it's not a good place. But Jonathan says, "Hey, if he humbles us, as he weakens us like this, it means the victory's ours." It's gotta love it. Um, he has this amazing understanding though of how it works. In verse 12, then the troops in the fort yelled to Jonathan and his armor bearer, come on up, we'll teach you a lesson. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, follow me, because the Lord has handed them over to Israel. It's just like, yeah, he knows how this works. It's amazing. In verse 15, um, yeah, sure enough, Yahweh reveals himself in weakness. Panic broke out in the camp, in the field, and among all the troops. Even those in the fort and the raiders shook with fear. The very ground shook. It was a terror from God. So here, the whole camp is just, they hear that there's quarrel going on. He doesn't kill a lot of men, but it's enough to uh, cause this panic, this fear, and then we have this earthquake that takes place, and it just adds to the confusion, and it's just like, whoa, that's okay. And then as the other armies are descending and such, so the rest of the army, and we see we see in verse 23 that Yahweh gets the credit. The Lord saved Israel that day. It wasn't Jonathan, it wasn't Saul, it wasn't anybody else. It was Yahweh saved Israel that day. And the fighting carried on beyond Beth Aven. So it's a pretty amazing situation there. And we see in verse 24, though, that there's a lot of mistakes are being made here. A lot of mistakes. We have this well-intended stuff, but it's misplaced zeal. Now, the Israelite soldiers were in a difficult situation that day because Saul had bound the troops by a solemn pledge. Anyone who eats anything before evening, when I have taken revenge on my enemies, is doomed. So none of the army ate anything because it's a solemn pledge, and we've seen how serious solemn pledges are, and it's really foolishness on the behalf of Saul, although it's just a misplaced zeal in all of this. Um, and then we see the importance of this. Verse 27, but Jonathan hadn't heard his father make the people swear the pledge, so he dipped the end of the staff he was carrying into the honeycomb. When he ate some, his eyes lit up. And so then he's informed of what his father had done. And Jonathan turns around and he criticizes. See, he criticizes. You don't do that. It's not just his father, it's the king. Jonathan said, my father has brought trouble to the land. Look how my eyes lit up when I tasted just a bit of that honey. It would have been better, even better, if the troops had eaten some of their enemies' plunder today when they found it. But now the Philistine defeat isn't as thorough as it might have been. Man, very reasonable, wise. It's bang on, but it's still wrong. It's still wrong. He isn't speaking to his father about this. He's speaking behind his father's back, and he's speaking to the troops. That's just not right. That's not how Yahweh does things. And it's hmm. Just keep in mind that Saul always wanted to do the right thing. He just didn't have the examples. He says, go among the troops and say to them, everyone must bring their ox or sheep and slaughter them here with me. Don't sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it. So everyone brought whatever they had and slaughtered it there. See, Saul wanted to do the right thing. He knew that what was happening was just wrong. His guys are hungry, but you still have to do it the right way, right? Well, he should have known that. But Saul was a victim to that as well, because he would be in such a hurry that he just wouldn't do it the right way. But in this case, he knew, and he wanted to protect his army. I mean, that's good leadership. But then look what he wants to do. He wants to continue the fight. He wants to pursue the Philistines. Let's go after the Philistines tonight and plunder them until morning. Saul said, we won't leave them a single survivor. Um, and all the troops are like gung ho, do whatever you think is best. They say going along with him, but it was the priest who spoke up and said, "Hey, let's ask God first." And that's wise counsel. This is his battle. It's his army. It's his people. What does he want us to do? And that's when they find out there's a problem. See, nobody did that with Joshua, and they got into a lot of trouble with Ai. because of it. At least here, the priest, remembering their history, what happened in the past, advises the king. Let's check with Yahweh on this. Let's not take it for granted. And come to find out, there's sin in the camp, just like there was with Joshua and Ai. And um, and so they find out. They find out, they do this thing, and they whittle it down to between Jonathan and Saul. Um, and come to find out, it's Jonathan. And Saul just like, oh, because of that original pledge, solemn pledge, he does it again here. And he says, may God deal harshly with me and worse still if you don't die today. He's not wrong, but he's wrong. He's not wrong because he has to keep the original pledge, but he could go to the Lord and see if there's a way of redeeming his son. But no, he just goes right to the jugular and wants to kill his son. Um, and here we have a really bad situation. Now he's he's caused a division, and the whole army rises up to protect Jonathan. But the troops said to Saul, why should Jonathan die when he has won this great victory for Israel? No way. As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair of his head will fall to the ground, because he did this today with God's help. So the troops rescued Jonathan, and he wasn't executed. It just puts Saul in such a weakened position. And that was all Jonathan. That was because Jonathan acted harshly. Jonathan criticized his dad. Um, yeah. But let's take note of this, that because Saul didn't get an answer, he didn't pursue. He didn't go because Yahweh was silent on it. Then Saul stopped chasing the Philistines, and the Philistines went back to their own country. But remember this. Going forward, we get such a bad impression of Saul, and there's no doubt that Saul ended up in a very bad place. But just think of it just for a moment. Look in verse 48. He acted heroically, defeating the Amalekites and rescuing Israel from the power of any who had plundered them, such as the Philistines, the Ammonites, and so on. He was a fierce leader. They won many battles. He just put Israel on the map. Like nobody would attack Israel now because they were going to be defeated by Saul. Like he's a mighty hero at this time. He is a mighty hero, and you got to keep that in mind as we go forward, because the mighty can fall, and we've already seen reasons for it. We see the Achilles heel. We see the difficulties. Not the Achilles heel like Samson, right? But the fact that he was doing his best, and he was messing up because he had no examples, no mentor, nobody to help him, and it was hard. So yeah, there's our introduction to Saul. Those were some of the best days, and we're gonna be seeing some of the worst days coming up. You guys have a wonderful day, and just keep consulting with the Lord, right? And keep following His instructions, because when we do, He prospers us. That's the way it works. You guys be blessed, be encouraged. See you tomorrow.